I'm going to move on to the third part about how the brain works in cognition and learning. So what is cognition? This is a good definition of cognition used in cognitive psychology. Is the acquisition, storage, manipulation, and retrieval of information or knowledge. As mentioned earlier, there are some aspects of cognition. These are some aspects of cognition being studied: memory, language, problem solving, and so on. There are some rough synonyms also used in the literature, such as thinking or information processing. Now, what about learning? So learning is formally defined as experience-dependent changes in knowledge and or behavior. So the key concept here is experience-dependent. Organisms such as animals and humans learn when they change their knowledge or behavior as they gain more experience interacting with the world and with others. There are different types of learning that you may have studied before. These include associative learning, observational learning, so on. Learning can also occur in various domains, such as in the cognitive, motor, affective, emotion domains, and so on. How does cognition relate to learning? A modern perspective is that learning is a process that supports cognition, supports and develops cognition. So some aspects of cognition can be innate, meaning it's inborn. For example, Elizabeth Spelke, who's a well-known researcher at Harvard University, has found that many infants as young as 6 months can do basic counting, even when parents don't actively teach them. However, most of what we humans consider complex cognition, such as language, problem solving, and so on, are learned via experience. For example, we become better at doing complex mathematics or writing as we learn more from experience over many years, sometimes decades. So to summarize, well, there can be distinctions between two, cognition and learning. In many cases, studying cognition means that we're studying the end result of a learning process taking place over many years, sometimes over decades. So how do we study the brain? One simple approach is called the localist approach. This is also mentioned in the textbook. So the localist approach simply looks for an area X that is important for object or task X by using subtraction. So here I'm showing a side view of the human brain in fMRI. This is the back of the brain, and this is the front of the brain. Let's say when a subject sees a picture of a teddy bear, here, both blue and red part of the visual cortex in the back of the brain become active. When a picture of dots is shown, only the blue part becomes active. So by subtracting one from the other, you get a single part of the brain that seems specialized for processing teddy bear pictures. This is a widely used approach, especially in the early days of fMRI research, but there are weaknesses. One important weakness is that it oversimplifies cognition, which can involve distributed processing over many parts in the brain. Nonetheless, the subtractive method or localist approach can be quite useful. The next approach is a more modern one that takes a distributed view of the brain. So here again, I'm showing a side view of the brain, the human brain in fMRI. This is the left half of the brain, front of the brain and back of the brain. And this is the right half of the brain. And the direction is flipped. This is the front of the brain and the back of the brain. Using the subtractive method that I mentioned earlier, a group of researchers recently found large areas of the brain that are activated when subjects write Mandarin characters compared to when they are resting. So you can see the act of writing Mandarin characters activates a huge chunk of the brain. So the researchers also compared writing Mandarin characters with drawing circles. This comparison uncovered brain areas that are presumably more specialized for writing Mandarin characters. There are areas in the frontal cortex in the front of the brain, as shown here, that are active, as well as in the visual cortex, the back of the brain, that are activated when the subjects write Mandarin characters. This study suggests that writing Mandarin characters, which I personally feel, I don't have personal experience, but as professionally, I think it's a complex form of cognition learned over many years, can involve distributed regions in the brain, suggesting a distributed processing cognition. I've been told by friends that it's really difficult to learn how to write Mandarin. You guys can tell me. Next, we move on to a dynamic approach to studying cognition. So what do we mean by dynamic? Dynamic means that brain activity is time varying. It's not a static picture like the ones that I've been showing you in fMRI. Rather, brain activity changes rapidly in time. So let's discuss one particularly interesting study published about 12 years ago that addressed problem solving. So subjects were given 3 words, for example, worm, shelf, and mark. And the goal is to find a single word that can be compounded with all 3 given words. So in this case, the solution is the word book, since it can make compound words such as bookworm, bookshelf, and bookmark. So some of the words are easy, some are quite difficult. This task is called the compound remote associate problem. So the researchers then use EEG to look at brain activity because EEG, as I mentioned earlier, has very good temporal resolution in the milliseconds range. This makes the method particularly suited for the question of dynamically changing brain activity, unlike fMRI, which is very slow. Here's a spectrogram plotting frequency in the y-axis against time, the x-axis. Frequency here refers to cycles per second. Just like in secondary school and high school, we learned that sine waves oscillate at particular frequency, for example, 40 cycles per second or 40 hertz. The brain can also oscillate at various frequencies. Red means there's more power at that frequency at a particular time point. For example, at around -1 second, which is 1 second before the subject came up with the solution, there was a huge increase, shown here, in oscillation at 40 to 50 hertz, particularly in the back of the head over occipital and parietal cortices. So this is the back of the head and this is the front of the head. At 0.5 seconds after the solution, there is widespread increase in power in many frequencies, as shown here. Here, the idea is that using the correct neuroimaging technology, we can see that our brain is not just a static picture, rather it changes dynamically, in this case, to solve problems in the language domain. Right, now that I've outlined some basic approaches to studying cognition, perhaps again we can take a few minutes to discuss some of the questions you may have. I've put up some potential questions here, but feel free to come up with others